Postcards from Nebraska on RFD-TV, a program about rural life. This week, join Roger Welsch for a look at economics in small-town America. The way folks in one town see it, you can't have a bust if you never had a boom. It's a tale of how remoteness maintains survival. What's in a name? Everything, actually. Roger examines names and how they are the handle that takes the hold of us, shapes our lives, and often makes us who we are. Plus, he's one of Nebraska's best-selling authors, famous for writing about science. Meet the university professor who takes his students into Nebraska's hills, lakes, and prairies, the places he calls the real laboratories. And finally, in typical Nebraska fashion, just when spring begins to peek out and tease with the colors of the season, the thick white blanket of winter returns. It's all this week on Postcards from Nebraska.
Dannebrog's Main Street hasn't been immune from the economic disasters of the past 12 years. Our bank went broke, the cafe closed, and the hardware store, and the antique store. All in all, despite the financial fog, things have been going pretty well. There's a new and successful gift shop on Main Street, and a new bakery where the old cafe used to be. Eric was thinking of selling the tavern, but now that things are going better, he's having second thoughts.
Lucky they got anybody around.
18, 19, 20. Thank you very much.
He thinks the recession never really came to Dannebrog.
Like I said, the so-called recession, I can't see has really hurt anything here. No, farm economy's been good for the last 2 or 3 years, and that always helps, you know, a small town.
Harriet's Danish Cafe has always been a drawing card in central Nebraska. Ray Johnson found a buyer for his grocery store, and it was a young local man, Kerry Lauritsen.
50, 75, 8, 9, 10.
Thanks, Kerry.
Thank you.
It's nice to know there are still young local folks who are interested in sticking around a little farm town like Dannebrog to buy a business and settle down. But there are no big construction projects going on around here. Too few little construction projects. There are no new industries, no new tourist attractions, no discoveries of new resources. And yet this region of the plains enjoys the highest employment rate in the nation.
Between here and the 5 Mile Corner is perfect. The railroad crossing and railroad track goes north of all of their property. It's already fenced.
Dannebrog has survived the past decade in part because of a handful of indefatigable volunteers.
We need your support.
Members of an organization called the Dannebrog Boosters Club, a civic group instrumental in keeping our town moving through uncertain times.
We have a commitment to those people that have donated money to restore this, not to build another one. And
remarkably, one of the factors that has spared America's Great Plains from the worst of recent economic disasters is the distance and remoteness that in the past has given the Great Plains their distinctive character and has, since the earliest years of the frontier, made America's outback the butt of jokes and insults. The Great American Desert, they called it. America's cultural desert. Doug Looney of Sports Illustrated described it as a landscape of wall-to-wall dust. He probably wrote that in a windowless office in New York City. Ron Wiggins of the Palm Beach Post wrote, "Nebraskans are so dull, for excitement they go to Iowa." Palm Beach. Bill Gray of the Detroit News concluded a long attack on Nebraska with the remarkable words, "The beat goes on in Detroit, it stopped in Nebraska." Detroit. Isn't that the place that's begging Nebraskans to buy its cars? When I first came to Dannebrog, I asked Mel over there at the service station what folks do here for excitement. I've never forgotten his response. Here in Dannebrog, Mel said, "We don't get excited." And I think that's what saved Dannebrog from the recession. There's a constant ripple effect across the continent. Ideas, social movements, power, fashion, such things begin on the East Coast and the West Coast, and over time ripple out across the country, reaching finally, if at all, the middle of the Great Plains, which I calculate to be somewhere about right here at the main intersection of Dannebrog, Nebraska. To the best of my knowledge, for example, no one in Dannebrog, Nebraska ever owned a Nehru jacket. There's no polenta or pita bread here, not even anchovies on the pizza. Eric doesn't serve daiquiris at the tavern, doesn't even own a blender, and the kids here sure don't do the lambada. A couple days ago, my pal Dan Selden asked me what this tofu stuff is anyway. Judging from his reaction after I told him, I'd guess that the tofu fad is going to wash up and pretty much die out on the sandy shores of the rural plains. So, as it turns out, what makes life good for most of us out here in the middle of nowhere is what makes life bad for some folks out here in the middle of nowhere. On the rural plains, distance and sparse population create an insulation from the hotbeds of change in America, sparing us the worst of the worst, and often, mercifully, the best of the best. In short, out here on the rural plains of Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas, we haven't suffered the long, painful hangover of America's economic bust because we weren't invited to the loud and flamboyant party of the boom.
Up next on Postcards from Nebraska.
Kids don't think much about names unless the initials spell goo or cow or ugh.
You're doing a good job, Jordan. Keep it up.
Their names are their names and seem as organic a part of them as their hands, eyes, or scabs.
It's very good, Michelle.
A lot of people invest more time and energy coming up with names for their boats and cars than for their kids. The current lists of the most popular names tell the story. Jessica, Brendan, Crystal, Ashley.
You do a very good job coloring, boys and girls. I like your Red Riding Hoods.
That's my daughter, Antonia Emily Celestine Welch. Now that may be a bit much. My name is Roger Lee Welch. 4 syllables, no significance. But Antonia Emily Celestine Welch, 11 syllables, embracing 2 grandmothers, 1 great-grandmother, 4 generations, 2 religions, warring nations, and invading armies.
Let me see how nice you can write your name on the back of your paper.
This year, Antonia is learning how to write. She probably wishes we'd named her Babs.
I see some very good listeners.
Kids don't think much about names unless the initials spell goo or cow or ugh.
You're doing a good job, Jordan. Keep it up.
Their names are their names and seem as organic a part of them as their hands, eyes, or scabs.
It's very good, Michelle.
A lot of people invest more time and energy coming up with names for their boats and cars than for their kids.
Good job, Jessica.
The current lists of the most popular names tell the story. Jessica, Brendan, Crystal, Ashley, Fawn. Names like that are chosen by fashion, not tradition.
Please put your crayons and pencils back in the can or basket.
These photographs represent our family tree. This is my son, Chris Edward, named after his grandfather Christian and his Uncle Ed. When Chris was born, the lady in the next bed named her baby Michelle Renee. Michelle Renee Obergesterhausen. I imagined even at the time that the proud parents were dreaming of the day that their daughter would marry some guy named Henri Beaujolais, or maybe Pierre Dubois, Michel René Beaujolais, Michel René Dubois. The last I heard, she married a farmer over by Henderson, Nebraska, and being a liberated woman, she hyphenated, as the phrase goes. She's now Michel René Obergesterhausen Poppenfuss.
Yes, here we go, Stephen.
The cute, trendy names of yesterday are all too often the embarrassments of today. Muffy, Vaughn, or get this, Roger. Of course, there's always a chance that any name may become an embarrassment by reasons beyond reason. Who could have predicted the fate of Millhouse, Spiro, Oliver, or Tammy, for example?
Come on, Bobby.
By and large, the best names are those that have some meaning beyond fashion. My daughter, Joyce Amelia, is named after her grandmothers Joyce and Bertha Amelia. Those are not just names. They're names with the emotional load of 3 generations. Muffy, on the other hand, is the name for a cat. Imagine Muffy's grandchildren eventually having to refer to her as Grandma Muffy. Most children will have only one name in their lives, but I was adopted into the Omaha Indian tribe 20 years ago, and I was given another name, the Nugagahi, Big Bull Buffalo. It was, my Indian friends thought, descriptive of my imposing bulk. My oldest daughter is named Jennifer Lee. The first was trendy, but the second is my own middle name. Anyway, Jenny named her daughter Jacinda Starr, in part out of recognition of her Omaha Indian heritage, in part out of well-considered creativity. Jacinda Starr is a name that Jenny thought about.
Antonia.
Most of us only get 1, maybe 2 names in our lifetime. So I think it's the duty of those of us who have the privilege of naming someone else to choose a name that's heroic, creative, and meaningful, but most of all, grounded in tradition.
When Postcards from Nebraska returns.
Genevieve is a throwback to the old-fashioned scientist who sensed no separation from the humanities. He's one of the fossils who still understands why it is that the arts and sciences are in the same college at most institutions of higher education.
I'm very optimistic about humanity, at least at this level. I'm just amazed always at the intellectual resources wrapped up in our society.
It's kind of the moment of truth, right?
Yeah. John Genevieve is one of Nebraska's best-known authors.
Something's flopping down there. So Mike is smiling. That means we must have.
What's unusual about John Genevieve is that he's made his mark in an unlikely direction for literary success: science.
This is from back in Keith County, from one of my favorite chapters called Game Fish, Trash Fish, Chubs, and Shiners. The suckers came, and I pulled more, and came more net, more algae, more suckers, and it all went on like some surreal dream of fish and weeds and water and smell, until the little boat struggled with the weight of the suckers, hundreds of pounds of trash fish.
Well, this is really a fairly spectacular haul. This is technically called a lot of fish. Oh, it's called. There's a lot of fish.
This morning at Nebraska's Lake McConney, John is conducting a class on parasites, or as he puts it, who's infecting whom. It's a hands-on class.
There you go. Some people think this fish is ugly, but to a parasitologist, it's really beautiful.
Are most of your students out here going to be professional parasitologists?
No, the vast majority will be physicians someplace or in the healthcare professions in some role. This is really their first encounter with things that infect other things. Yeah. So everybody's going to have more worms than you ever dreamed of having before in your life.
His classes are not simply about science, botany, zoology, geology, geography, but about how man uses science and science uses man.
And if you see any white spots on the gill, make sure we keep that fish.
For Genevieve, each element of life on Earth is a metaphor for all the rest of life. There's no such thing as a dull piece of the whole, because the whole is ultimately made up of all those pieces.
A bucket of that water right there has a lifetime's worth of work at it if you study it at a certain level. The secret that every biologist knows is that the world is exceedingly complex, exceedingly rich. You can find that complexity, you can find that richness everywhere you go.
The students at the Cedar Point Biological Center near Ogallala, Nebraska, don't simply examine lab specimens drenched in formaldehyde.
One of the major things you'll get out of this exercise today is a first-hand look at who's infected with whom.
Part of the process of learning, in Genevieve's mind, is gathering specimens, understanding the role of parasites in the context of life.
And in the parasitology business, this is what's called an obnoxiously healthy fish.
What are these young people out here who are dismantling fish today learning about themselves and about other human beings?
Well, I think they learn, first of all, about failure. They learn about patience. They learn about patience with dumb animals. They learn about the logistics of doing original investigation. Let's everybody at least try to get one pair of guts out by lunch.
Discoveries here are small, sometimes elusive, maybe minute, and in some cases, microscopic. But they generate a full share of excitement in the scholar-teacher as well as the student-explorer.
We discover new species periodically. We discover new relationships between species of parasites and their hosts. We discover questions to explore that haven't been explored before.
Wait a minute. What happened to the notion of the objective, unemotional, detached, cool scientist? There's some disagreement among Genevieve's colleagues about this approach to science. Are researchers and science writers supposed to be this enthusiastic about the objects they study and the contexts in which they find them?
Okay, let's take a look at this, folks. This is one of the freshwater annelids.
The total experience of doing something original is what American higher education does not really provide, and that's the one thing they get out here. And I think a scientist has an obligation to teach science, and a scientist has an obligation to his or her nation to make certain that that nation is scientifically literate.
Look at all those white buckets.
Well, the good thing is you got your day's work cut out for you.
Genevieve is a throwback to the old-fashioned scientist who sensed no separation from the humanities. He's one of the fossils who still understands why it is that the arts and sciences are in the same college at most institutions of higher education. That mood of respect for the intelligence of the general public is as evident in his writing as it is in his teaching.
I got my knife.
Game fish are game fish only in relation to trash fish. If there were no species called game fish, then the species we call trash fish would probably be fair game. Captain Minnow said many times what a delicate taste trash fish often have, which probably means that for true game fish, fair game has a much broader meaning than perhaps we suspect. As you might guess, that's a pretty metaphorical use of it.
For John Genevieve, science is for everyone. This lake and the hills around it are the real classroom, the real laboratory, the real source of knowledge, and not a bad place to have a little fun.
Still to come on Postcards from Nebraska.
I love lilacs. They're So I rejoice when ours start to leaf out and the buds start to show a little bit of color. And then it seems that every year there's one last April blizzard, a couple of nights below freezing. Will the lilacs make it this year? I don't think so.
Oklahoma Panhandle.
10/11 News. Snow is actually a good insulator in cold weather.
You really don't need to protect the tulips. Mother Nature gives them a protective coating already, so they'll be just fine.
Last Sunday was Easter. The wild plum bushes look better than they have for years, full of fragrant blossoms that promised a bumper crop of sweet fruit. Not now. They're frozen and battered after last night's storm. No plums this year. Farmers were in the fields for a week planting corn. Now the tractors are silent and cold. They can start over again this week. Calves frisked in the spring sun. Now they shiver in a driving north wind. Some are probably dead out there in the pastures, their lives snuffed out by this overnight blizzard. It's the same thing every damn year. I love lilacs, so I rejoice when ours start to leaf out and the buds start to show a little bit of color. And then it seems that every year there's one last April blizzard, a couple of nights below freezing. Will the lilacs make it this year? I don't think so. O.E. Rolvod called this place the edge of darkness, writing, a gray waste, an empty silence, a boundless cold. Snow fell, snow flew, a universe of nothing but dead whiteness. Rolvod wrote of a Great Plains malevolent against man, hating his intrusions and desecrations. Giant-like and full of cunning, he wrote in his Giants in the Earth. She laughed, now we will see what human might avail against us. Now we'll see. Mari Sandoz, Willa Cather, Wright Morris, all Nebraskans and all great writers. They were great writers because they had good eyes. And because they had good eyes, they could see all of this clearly. While they don't share Rolvod's vision of a purposely cruel landscape, they know from personal experience the sort of pain storms like this inflict on fragile things like lilacs and plums and human beings. Willa Cather and Mari Sandoz both wrote of iron-hard ground. And Wright Morris spoke of sod huts completely buried under spring snows. Every damned year, the same thing. But maybe that's the point. These annual April storms that frustrate farmers and gardeners and baseball players who jump the vernal gun aren't divine playthings tossed into our path so we'll stub our toes. The Great Plains have their own agenda, even if we haven't figured it out. Perhaps Rolvod is right in thinking of this geography as a brooding hulk that breathes in and breathes out. But the hulk doesn't much notice us. It has its annual schedule that must be kept, and our plums and double headers are of no note in the great grinding of meteorological gears. It hasn't just been this way every year since the frontier moved through here a little over a century ago, a piddly 100 years. The tribes, Omaha, Ponca, Odo, Pawnee, they knew all about this too. It was every damn year for them too. It's been this way every year since the last glaciers retreated, and probably even before that. This is the way it's always been. The thing is, we haven't been here long enough yet to figure it all out. And even when we do, it won't make any difference to anyone or anything but us. The Great Plains will forever breathe in and breathe out, and every damn year these April blizzards will sweep down out of the north to disappoint us, destroy dreams, obliterate scribblings on calendars. I suppose that the people who choose to live here will forget, or ignore, what seems inevitable. They'll plan and plant, prune and dream, and every damn year make the same complaint. It happens every damn year. It's the way of the people of the plains to complain, and it's the way of the plains to give them plenty to complain about.